Well, hello and welcome back to another episode of Twin Carbs. Today we're back looking again at the BMW Z4. You can see that we've got it back up on stilts again. This time it is a problem with the front suspension. The coil spring on the driver's side has broken. So we're going to replace both struts. They've been in there about 17 years now, so it's time they were changed. I'm just going to strip them out, hopefully before the weather changes, and we'll see you again in a second. Right, well, the Scottish weather, being its usual kind self, has been particularly unkind to us, and it's raining persistently outside. So I moved into the garage to just explain a couple of issues. Obviously, we've got the shocks and the springs out. This is from the driver's side, or the right hand side, where the spring was broken. You can see it there, and that actually caused an issue because it was no longer sitting in the top mount. So as soon as you unbolt the 3 bolts in the top, the spring forces the shock out down below. So wasn't expecting that really. You can see not only, well, probably the reason that the spring was broken was that this is pretty much not having an effect at all. Now, A, it shouldn't push down, and B, it should restore to its rightful position, and it's not doing either of these correctly. So shocker's obviously been in a bad way for some time. I've taken the top mounts and the bearing, the swivel mount, off. I need those two, well, one's a sort of insulating cup or a dust cup for the bearing, and another one's just a spacer washer. I need those for the reassembly. I've bought new top mounts, bearings, new rubbers, new gaiters, new rubbers top and bottom. This one out here, so that's a new rubber installed in the top cup. So in the top cup, the end of the spring, the top of the spring, sits nicely in there. Don't be confused by the bottom mount, because it suggests it should sit in that slot there, but it doesn't. If you notice that the bottom plate is actually shaped slightly concentrically, you'll find that the spring is also shaped similarly. Don't know if you can see it there, but so that extended oval length sits out in this part here and then goes round, and the actual spring should sit around about this point. The end of the spring should sit in that point there. Top nut here I think is a 21 millimeter, and you need a 6 millimeter Allen key to hold it at the top when you're assembling. Challenge with assembling is that you'll see that the spring, by comparison, is pretty large to the amount of room that you've got in the shock, so you need to compress this quite a bit. The challenge with that is there aren't many turns on the spring, as you can see, to fit spring compressors. So what I was finding was that by the time you got them on maybe 2 sections, you only had about this amount of space, then maybe a couple of inches to actually compress the spring, and it wasn't enough. So those spring compressors were no use. What I then moved to was something a bit meatier altogether that I'd seen on YouTube, and effectively what these allow you to do is to actually either sit the top cup or the bottom plate in one of those retained by the lip on this, and then compress the spring using, I think, a pretty large nut on the end of that. The problem was, first of all, when we tried it on the bottom plate, and it actually, the pressure that we put this under took the bottom plate completely off the shock. So we've had to refit that and recompress it. The other problem was that on the top section, there's the top plate. On this plate, it sits that way. It does suggest that you can fit it inside that lip and compress down. And sadly, it doesn't fit nearly well enough, and you're only left with about 1 centimetre of that edge catching the lip when you start to compress. I didn't get it compressed very far before the new spring took off across the garage. So next thought was to move to something a bit bigger and possibly a bit safer and hopefully more effective, which is this. So it's mounted on a stand. It's got a safety guard, and what I'm going to do just now is try and install a new spring onto one of the new shocks, and we'll walk you through that in a second. Okay, so we'll put the strut, the shock absorber section, into the compressor, and it's clamped in at the bottom there and rests on a little stirrup cup. What I'm going to do now is put the spring on, and you'll notice the slightly offset shape at the bottom. I'm going to put down, and it sits just in there like that. Don't know if you can see it, but it should sit pretty neatly. It doesn't go all the way around into that little slot. It sits just off there, about 1 inch back from it. So the spring's in there. I'm now going to roughly position where I want the clamps to be, and you want them as good as you can get, diametrically opposed. So I'm just going to adjust that up, and I'll be back in a sec. Okay, so the spring is on. We've put the clamps onto the spring and put the safety guard around just in case. So I'm going to pump the jacking system up and see if we can get that spring compressed far enough. So we have a couple of things to go on the top here. Obviously the top cup and then the bearing cup. I'm just going to check and see where we are with those. So it's taken a few extra bumps more just to get that up, but as you can now see, I've got the top cap with the spacer washer sitting nicely on top of the strut, and I can line that up in the spring ready to release. What I'm now going to do is have the new bearing mount in here. I've already fitted a little dust cap shield, so that just sits on top, and what I'll do now is I'll find the nut and fix that to the top of the shaft. Okay, so nut's on. It's only loosely fitted. Interestingly, the new shock absorber, which is a Bilstein rather than a stock BMW one, is has different sizes of nuts and Allen keys in the top. So it's now a 22. So I've put a 22 socket on that. The socket is a go through. So bear with me. Pop that on the top, and then insert the Allen key fitting, 7mm this time. And now it's just a case of tightening that up. I'll be right back. So that's the nut tightened down. The Allen key obviously is there to stop the shaft spinning as you tighten that up. It gets tightened to, I think, about 60 Newton meters. I'll double check that. Now it's only a case of releasing the spring, and hopefully it will sit in that little cup where it should. Let's give it a try. Well, it seems to be sitting okay there. Let me just check around this side. See where we are. Yep, that's sitting nice. Just a case of loosening off the clamps, and hopefully that'll be us. Okay, so that's the guard off. I'm just going to unscrew those and loosen those clamps. One side, and this one just being marginally awkward, so I'll just take that from the bottom. Now there's a clamp down here that holds the shocker in place. If we undo that, which is difficult with only one pair of hands. Yeah. Get the clamp out the way, and that lifts out nicely. So there we have it. One new shocker, complete with springs, bump stops, gaiters, everything that we need is on there, and new top cap, new rubbers. Everything perfect. Okay, so what I want to do here is, this is the shock absorber and spring, the strut assembly for the passenger side, the left hand side, and although I have almost every part required to build a new McPherson strut, there are 2 washers on here that I need. So I'm just going to compress the spring, take the top cap off, recover the washers, and then what I'll be able to do is release the spring, dismantle it all, and then the rest of it is scrap, basically. Right, so that's the old struts dismantled, the spring off. It's a bit of a challenge because I had to actually use the top cap to mount the spring compressor on, because the spring refused to release from the top cap when I compressed it. But certainly both of them are out. I'll just show you how effective these shocks were. So this should be fairly difficult to press down on. As you can see, I'm barely putting the weight of my hand on it. It should automatically spring up as well.
which it isn't. So that's pretty much why the spring on this side was something to do all the work, and therefore has fractured. This one, the passenger side, was slightly better. If I can push that down, it's slightly harder to push down, and well, takes its time to come back up, but it does, I guess, at some point come back up. But both of them are pretty well knackered, so scrap heap for them. Around this side we have our new assembled struts with the shock absorbers and springs all mounted, ready to go in the car. So we'll go and make a start with that. Right, so this is the driver's side, the right hand side, and you'll see that when I was trying to get this the bolt out of the knuckle here, that took a lot of persuading. I've had to take the caliper off to get access to it. However, what I discovered was, and I don't know if I can get a decent picture on this, but obviously these are two jaws on the knuckle. This is cast iron, and they're pulled together as you clamp the bolt up from this side. Obviously, as you start to release that bolt, those jaws move apart, and therefore as they move apart, the alignment of the threads on this side through the open casting on this side go out of alignment slightly and tighten on the bolt, which makes it tight to remove. It actually gets tighter as you undo it. What I did eventually was, on this side and on the other side, was use a pair of, or a set I suppose, of ball joint splitters, and you just mount that. There's not a lot of room when the bolt's on there, but if you can see that, apologies for the tie wraps in the way, they're just holding the knuckle in place to take the strain off the brake hose. But if you can get that on and tighten it, then that holds those together as you undo the bolt, and therefore you don't have that alignment issue, and you can tighten it up reasonably tight with those ball joint splitters. So top tip for anybody who's struggling to get that bolt out, maybe that'll help someone. So I'm going to now assemble the shock. Obviously bottom end goes in here, at the top there are mounted in the hole 3 bolts, and then it's just a case of putting the drop link back in. Everything's ready to go. It's 13mm nuts on the top, 16 open spanner on the flats in the back of the drop link, and excuse me, 16mm socket on the front, and I'll give you the torque settings in a minute. And the bolt, it's always advised to get a new bolt for these, so I've got new bolts and they're 18mm. So I'll go ahead, put that in, and come back to you in a sec. Okay, well that was reasonably straightforward. The strut's now in position. I've got the bolts tightened loosely and I'm just about to torque them. The 3 that hold the bearing cup at the top I'll torque later on. So I'm going to do the big nut at the bottom here that's on the clamping the knuckle to the shock absorber. The torque setting that I've found for that is 81 Newton meters. The torque setting that I have for the drop link is 58 Newton meters. You'll note the spanners there because I've still to torque that up. The 3 bolts on the top have got settings anywhere from 35 to 41, so I'm sure 40 will do the job. And incidentally, the shaft nut So that one nut that goes on the top of the shaft holding the spring cap and everything in place is 64 Newton meters. So 81 on the big bolt, 58 on the drop link, roughly 40 on the 3 top nuts, and 64 on the shaft nut. So I'll go ahead and torque them up now. So there we have it. Everything nice and tight, all topped up. The other side obviously is pretty much the same process, just the reversal of that. The only thing to do on this side now is to mount the caliper back onto the mounts and fit the brake pipe and the ABS sensor. Hopefully you haven't forgotten to mount this little fella. Well, that's all from Twin Carbs. Thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you all again very soon. Bye for now.